Hello there, kia ora. It took just 5 days from "we can't afford the hospital we've been promising the South Island for years" to "maybe we should look at public-private partnerships to pay for it," in the most unsurprising announcement since your cat declared the food bowl was empty while it's still half full. PPP is a model that ACT has been pushing for a long time, believing it to be a more efficient way to undertake, well, in the case of the ACT Party, pretty much everything. But it is a model often floated for big infrastructure projects, with supporters often claiming it'll create more efficient cost-benefit outcomes and ultimately cost the government less as private enterprise pays for things then leases it back to the government. But there are a lot of issues around PPPs, like the fact that there's actually no real clear definition of them. Each model is slightly different and it varies from country to country. When it comes to our healthcare system, we already have a lot of what some would consider PPPs in ways that you might not necessarily realise. Surgery sent to private clinics or private specialists, for-profit telehealth, for-profit urgent care, for-profit services like radiology. But it's a very modern neoliberal idea to pitch PPP for infrastructure. Now, they'll claim it means you can bring in private enterprise efficiencies to the process, that private enterprise will bear the weight of the cost of upfront funding, meaning that taxpayers are charged less. Only the research doesn't actually back that up. At best, the research around value for money and private efficiency from PPPs is mixed and is influenced by a range of factors, like the changing costs of labour and materials, the ability to loan over longer periods at variable interest options, whether a government considers a PPP investment on book or off book, and the required rate of return and profitability from the private investor. The Attorney General of Canada has actually repeated many times that off-book accounting for government and PPPs is misleading, and the public need to be aware of the actual costs of projects. In fact, numerous studies have shown that as a cost-saving venture, PPPs tend to miss the mark. On average, governments end up paying more for PPP projects than they would for traditionally funded projects, because of the private sector's higher cost of capital, added transaction costs, and a profit-driven ideology for operations. And it's not uncommon in past projects around the world that the way to lower these costs has been to cut corners, designing the project to be more profitable. This has led to supporters of PPPs to use the phrase value for money as an argument for their use. But this is both vague and has been called technocratic mumbo jumbo by auditors in the past, with value for money being seen as an inadequate way to evaluate costs. For many, it's seen on a spectrum of privatisation. While it's not completely selling assets, it's far from being an asset owned by the country without a drive for profit that leads to cost-cutting measures throughout the process. Research in Australia found that partnerships were inferior to the standard model of public procurement based on competitive tendered construction. And a New Zealand Treasury report commissioned by the last national government found there was, and I quote, little reliable empirical evidence about the costs and benefits of PPPs. Their report also pointed out that there are other ways of obtaining private sector finance that don't involve, again I quote, the contractual complexities and rigidities of PPPs. There's also an argument that these partnerships reduce risk, but they really just transfer the risk. While UK reports into this issue also highlighted the large returns private investors have made off the back of taxpayers when this happens. Organisations like Serco, for example, have undertaken past PPPs in the UK which have seen massive cost blowouts that caused the collapse for building contractors of their business that were involved. But Serco still profited from the arrangement. And that transfer of risk can often be used to manipulate arguments for it to occur, because the risk of private investment is different to public investment in PPPs, which changes the way costs are calculated. And that risk is often unknown to the public due to the commercially sensitive nature of these partnerships requiring confidentiality. There are places where private-public partnerships work, and there are some that they really don't. Low-wage economies, for example, tend to have trouble finding ways to make PPPs profitable, and they tend to have heavier impacts on low-income earners. There are a huge number of risks involved, and on the whole, research tends to see them as a bit of a smokescreen to hide costs, not save costs. But in a country where the government seems disinclined to listen to research, borrows $12 billion for things that aren't tax cuts while offering $14 billion in tax cuts, A smokescreen to hide costs and ill thought out plans certainly seem like something they'd probably be keen for. Wait, you're still here? It's over. I found another video.